The moment I understood that driving my ex-girlfriend home had been a mistake, my hand was already on the doorknob of her apartment. Claire Morgan stood behind me in the dim hallway, barefoot because one of her heels had broken at the restaurant. Her dark hair loosened from the careful style she had worn to our friend's anniversary dinner. I had carried her bag upstairs, checked that the dizziness she felt in the parking lot had passed, and placed her keys on the table. The decent thing had been done. All I needed to do was leave before old memories turned a simple favor into something neither of us could control. Then Claire said my name. I turned, expecting a thank you. Instead, she crossed the room and caught my wrist. Please don't go yet. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was firm. Behind her, on the kitchen counter, lay an envelope bearing my name in handwriting I had not seen in 6 years. Before I could ask why she had it, someone knocked 3 times on the apartment door. Claire's face lost all color. Whatever happens, she whispered, don't give him that letter. Before I tell you how one ride home reopened the relationship I thought had ended forever, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy stories about unfinished love and difficult second chances. And leave a comment telling me whether you would stay when an ex asked you not to leave because the reason Claire kept me there changed everything I believed about our breakup. My name is Ethan Walker. I was 37 years old, lived in Asheville, North Carolina, and made custom furniture in a workshop that smelled permanently of cedar, sawdust, and coffee. 6 years earlier, I had been planning to marry Claire. We had dated for 5 years, shared a small rental house near the river, and spent weekends searching estate sales for furniture we could restore. I designed tables and cabinets. Claire worked as an occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center, helping people relearn ordinary movements after strokes, injuries, and surgeries. She believed dignity lived in small acts, buttoning your own shirt, lifting a coffee cup, turning a key in a lock. I believed I understood patience because I could spend 40 hours sanding a piece of wood no one would notice closely. Claire used to tell me I was patient with objects because they never changed their minds. We loved each other, but we loved badly during the final year. My furniture business was failing. I worked longer hours and concealed debt because I was ashamed. Claire's mother, Margaret, had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer and needed increasing care. Claire spent most evenings driving between work, our house, and her mother's apartment. She asked me for help, though rarely in direct sentences. I offered solutions rather than presents. When she said she was exhausted, I made schedules. When she said she was scared, I researched treatment statistics. When she said she felt alone, I reminded her that I was working to protect our future. The relationship finally broke on a Tuesday night after I discovered Claire had applied for a position in Denver without telling me. You were going to move? I asked. I was going to decide after the interview. Without discussing it, I have discussed needing a change for a year. Not moving across the country. Because every conversation becomes an argument for staying exactly where you are comfortable. I accused her of abandoning us while I was trying to save the business. She accused me of using the business to avoid every part of life I could not control. By morning, she had packed 2 suitcases. She left the engagement ring on the bathroom sink, moved to her mother's apartment, and accepted the job in Denver 6 weeks later. We spoke only twice after that. The first call became another argument. The second happened after Margaret died. When I left a message, Claire never returned. Years passed. My business survived and eventually became successful. Claire built a respected rehabilitation program in Colorado. Mutual friends occasionally mentioned her, but I trained myself not to ask questions. Then our college friends, Michael and Jenna Ruiz, invited both of us to a dinner celebrating their 20th anniversary. It isn't a wedding, Michael told me when I hesitated. No speeches, no dancing, no emotional traps. Claire is attending. You're both adults. That has never prevented emotional traps. I agreed because Michael had helped me save my workshop during the worst year of my life, and because avoiding one woman after 6 years felt like surrendering too much ground to history. Claire arrived late. I recognized her laugh before I saw her. She entered the private dining room wearing a dark red dress and a long black coat, apologizing to Jenna while rain glistened in her hair. She looked both familiar and changed. Her face had become slightly sharper, her posture more confident, but she still touched the silver pendant at her throat whenever she felt uncertain. I had given her that pendant on our second anniversary. Seeing it struck harder than seeing her. Claire noticed me moments later. Her smile faltered, then returned in a more careful form. Ethan. Claire. You look well. So do you. It was the kind of exchange strangers used when forced to acknowledge a shared history. Michael appeared between us with drinks and the enthusiasm of a man who did not understand that cheerful interference could qualify as violence. Dinner placed Claire 2 seats across from me. We spoke mostly to other people, but I noticed details against my will. She still removed onions from salad. She still laughed by lowering her head first, as though joy embarrassed her. When someone asked about Denver, she said she had resigned from the hospital 3 months earlier and returned to Asheville temporarily. Temporarily? Jenna asked. Claire's eyes moved briefly toward me. I haven't decided. A man named Richard Hale sat beside her. He was in his early 40s, polished, attentive, and too comfortable touching the back of Claire's chair. Michael introduced him as a physician who had worked with Claire in Denver. I assumed they were together. The assumption bothered me enough that I became unusually interested in the breadbasket. Near the end of dinner, Richard and Claire argued quietly in the hallway. I heard only fragments as I returned from the restroom. You said you would sign tomorrow, Richard said. Claire answered, I said I would review it. There is nothing left to review. Then you sign it. Richard noticed me and lowered his voice. Claire walked past him into the dining room without looking at me. 20 minutes later, she nearly collapsed beside the restaurant entrance. I caught her elbow before she fell. I'm fine, she said automatically. You're pale. I stood too quickly. You were already standing. Then I walked too quickly. Richard approached with her coat. I'll take her home. Claire's body stiffened. No. His expression tightened. Claire, don't make this difficult. I called a car. She reached for her phone, but the screen was dark. Battery died? I should have stayed silent. Instead, I said, I'll drive her. Richard looked at me. You're Ethan. Apparently, my reputation traveled. Claire gave me a warning glance, though I could not tell whom it was meant for. That isn't necessary, she said. You're dizzy, your phone is dead, and it's raining. I can manage. You always say that 5 minutes before making management everyone else's problem. The old sentence escaped before I could stop it. Claire stared at me, then laughed once despite herself. Still charming. Still upright, which is the current goal. Richard offered again. Claire refused more firmly. I helped her into my truck while he watched from beneath the restaurant awning. Was that wise? She asked after I closed the door. Driving you? Provoking Richard. I asked his name, not permission. You didn't ask his name. Then I was even less provocative than you think. She leaned back and closed her eyes. You haven't changed. You have known me for 12 minutes. I knew you for 5 years. Past tense matters. Claire opened her eyes. Yes, it does. The drive to her apartment took 20 minutes. Rain drummed against the windshield, filling the spaces where conversation might have gone. Claire directed me toward a renovated textile building near the river. You live here? I asked. For the last month. I thought you returned temporarily. Temporary people still require roofs. Why did you leave Denver? The program lost funding. The answer came too quickly. And Richard? Former colleague. Only colleague? Claire turned toward the window. We dated. Past tense? Very. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. He doesn't seem informed. He understands. He disagrees. That sounds healthy. You have no right to judge him based on 5 minutes. I watched you become afraid when he offered to drive us. I was not afraid. You became still. Claire looked at me sharply. You remember that? Some things. The truck stopped at a red light. What does he want you to sign? You heard us. Enough to ask. A professional agreement. That explains nothing. It isn't your concern. Then stop answering halfway. She exhaled and pressed her fingers to her temple. I have a migraine starting. Can we delay the interrogation? I wasn't interrogating you. You always believed adding a calm tone turned questions into kindness. The accusation hit an old place. I drove the remaining distance without speaking. At the building, I found visitor parking and walked her inside. Claire objected when I carried her bag. I am dizzy, not incapacitated. Your heel broke. The bag still functions. Your elevator may not. 3rd floor. The elevator worked, but she leaned against the wall during the ride. Inside her apartment, moving boxes lined the living room. The furniture looked temporary except for one oak side table I had made during our first year together. I recognized the uneven drawer immediately. You kept that. Claire followed my gaze. It holds things. A glowing review of my craftsmanship. The drawer still sticks? You refused to let me repair it. You said the flaw gave it character. I was 28 and avoiding responsibility. That also describes our relationship. I set down her bag. Do you have medication? Kitchen cabinet. I brought water and the prescription bottle. Claire took a tablet, then sat on the couch with her eyes closed. Do you need someone to stay? I asked. No. Relief and disappointment arrived together. Then I'll go. I collected my keys, walked to the door, and reached for the handle. Ethan. Her voice had changed. I turned. Claire stood behind the couch, one hand gripping the cushion. Please don't go yet. I saw fear now, unmistakable and unprotected. On the counter behind her lay the envelope with my name. Then someone knocked. Claire crossed the room quickly and caught my wrist. Don't answer. The knock came again. Is it Richard? I whispered. Probably. Does he have a key? Not anymore. Why is there a letter addressed to me? Ethan, please, Richard called from the hallway. Claire, I know you're inside. I moved away from the door. Did he follow us? He knows the address. Should I call security? Not yet. Why not? Because he isn't dangerous. The way she said it sounded like an argument she had rehearsed for herself. Richard knocked harder. You left the documents in my car. Claire looked toward her bag. They aren't his. What documents? I asked. The agreement. What agreement? Ethan, this is not the time. Richard's voice sharpened. If you don't sign tomorrow, the clinic loses the lease and 27 patients lose their treatment program. Claire closed her eyes. I understood only enough to know the conflict was larger than a romantic breakup. Tell him you will call tomorrow, Shasvam, I said. He will keep knocking. Then building security can explain boundaries. Claire hesitated, then called the front desk from the wall phone. Richard left before security reached the floor, but not before saying through the door, ask Ethan why his name is in the contract. The hallway became silent. I turned toward Claire. My name? She looked at the envelope. Sit down. No. Your voice is rising. My name is apparently in a legal document connected to your former boyfriend and a clinic I have never heard of. Rising feels appropriate. Claire lowered herself onto the couch. The clinic is called Second Step. I founded it in Denver 3 years ago. We provided intensive occupational therapy to adults who lost access to treatment after insurance limits ended. You told everyone the hospital program lost funding. It did. Second Step was separate. And Richard? Medical director and financial partner. Why is my name involved? Claire pointed to the envelope. Read the letter first. The envelope had been sealed and opened once, then closed with clear tape. My name appeared in Margaret Morgan's handwriting. Claire's mother had written the letter 7 years earlier before her diagnosis became public. Ethan, if Claire gives you this, it means she finally stopped trying to carry everything alone. I have asked her not to sacrifice her life for my illness, but she believes love is proven by staying until nothing remains of the person who stayed. You understand this because you do the same thing with your work. Please do not rescue her. Do not persuade her. Ask her what she wants when fear is not answering for her. Beneath the message, Margaret had included information about a trust she intended to create from the sale of family land. Half would support Claire's future work in rehabilitation. The other half would be available only if Claire and I jointly submitted a plan for a community therapy center in Asheville. I read that section twice. Why would your mother put me in control of money meant for you? She didn't. The trust required both of us to approve a charitable use because she believed we balanced each other. That is control. It was also before we broke up. The trust should have been changed. She tried. Her condition declined before the attorneys finished the amendment. How much money? Claire looked down. $800,000 remains. I sat in the chair opposite her. And you never told me. I learned about the final terms after Mom died. 5 years ago. Yes. Why didn't the trustee contact me? I asked him not to. The deadline to use the funds was 10 years, and I believed I could amend the trust or create a different qualifying structure. Did you? No. So Richard wants me to sign something. Second Step is at risk of closing. Our landlord in Denver sold the building. Richard found an available rehabilitation facility outside Asheville. The trust could purchase it and convert the clinic into a nonprofit center. That sounds close to what your mother intended. It is. Then why didn't you contact me before tonight? Claire's face tightened. Because you would have thought I came back for money. I might have thought you came back to explain why my name was tied to a trust. And then what? You would evaluate the plan, point out every weakness, and decide whether the work I built was worthy of the future my mother imagined. The trust requires my approval. I did not create that. No, but you would hold power over something that became mine after I built it without you. Then don't use the trust. Without it, 27 patients lose care and 11 employees lose jobs. So I'm expected to sign. Richard expects that, I don't. What do you expect? I don't know. I stood and moved toward the kitchen, needing distance. You returned to Asheville a month ago, lived 10 minutes from me, carried a letter addressed to me, and waited until a dinner where we accidentally met. It was not accidental. Michael told me you were coming. That makes it worse. I planned to give you the letter after dinner. Then Richard arrived. He was invited by Jenna because she knew we had worked together. I did not bring him. Were you going to ask me to release the money? I was going to ask you to review the plan. Same result. Claire stood despite the migraine pain visible in her face. No, a request and an expectation are different. Not when patients are being used as the deadline, and I did not create their need to pressure you. But you let Richard mention it through the door. I was trying to keep him from making a scene. And now I am trapped inside your apartment with my dead ex-fiancé's mother asking me not to rescue you while a clinic depends on whether I sign a contract. Claire stared at me. You are not trapped. You can leave. The words landed heavily because moments earlier she had asked me not to. Is that what you want? I asked. No. Then tell me what you want instead of offering an exit because you fear the answer. Her expression broke slightly. I want you to stay long enough for the medication to work because I am scared Richard will return. I want you to read the plan tomorrow as someone who understands buildings, budgets, and the way I make decisions when I am desperate. I want you to say no if the plan is bad, and I want all of that without pretending I stopped loving you years ago. Silence filled the apartment. You still love me? I asked. Claire looked away. That is the least practical part of what I said. It is the only part without a contract. I did not come back because of love. That does not answer me. I loved you when I left. I hated you for making leaving necessary. I missed you after I stopped hating you. I built an entire life where none of those feelings required action. Until now. Until my clinic began failing and Mom's letter became impossible to ignore it. So you don't know whether you want me or need my signature. Why, exactly. The honesty hurt more than a romantic lie would have. Then we do nothing tonight, I said. No contracts, no decisions about us. I'll stay on the couch until morning. Tomorrow we review the plan with separate attorneys. Claire nodded, tears gathering. Thank you. Do not thank me yet, I may refuse. That is why I asked you. Claire slept in her bedroom while I remained on the couch, though neither of us rested much. Around 2, she entered the living room wearing an oversized sweater and carrying 2 mugs of tea. Migraine? I asked. Better. Richard? No messages since he left. She handed me a mug. You remembered how I take tea. You use too much honey. That is judgment, not memory. She sat at the opposite end of the couch. The letter remained on the coffee table between us. Did your mother know we were struggling? I asked. More than I told her. She blamed me? Sometimes. Other times she blamed me. Mostly she was angry at being sick. Claire tucked one leg beneath herself. She wrote that letter before the diagnosis was confirmed. She believed she had years to fix the trust. Why involve me at all? She watched us together. She thought you gave shape to my ideas and I made you care about something beyond whether the shape held. That sounds flattering until money enters it. She trusted you. You didn't. Claire accepted the statement. Not by the end. Did you really apply to Denver because you wanted a different career? Partly. The large reason was Mom. Your mother was here. Exactly. She refused treatment unless I stopped rearranging my life around her. She told me she would move in with my aunt if I stayed in Nashville. So leaving was part of her plan. She wanted me to accept the Denver job. I wanted you to come. You never asked. I hinted. You accused my entire life of being too small. Because asking directly meant you could say no. You left instead. Yes, Claire wrapped both hands around the mug. I needed you to volunteer because then I wouldn't feel guilty for taking you away from the workshop. The workshop was failing. I know now. Her eyes lifted. Why didn't you tell me about the debt? Because you were caring for your mother. I wanted to be the stable part of your life. You became unavailable instead. I thought if I solved the business, everything else would become easier. And I thought if you loved me enough, you would see what I couldn't ask for, but we were idiots. Different kinds. A reluctant smile passed between us. Then Claire said, "Did you ever come close to marrying someone else?" Once. Her expression remained still, but her fingers tightened. Her name was Hannah. She was a landscape architect. We dated for almost 2 years. What happened? She wanted to move to Raleigh. I said I could not leave the workshop. Claire looked toward the rain-dark windows. History. Not exactly. Hannah asked clearly. I answered clearly. She moved, and we ended without turning each other into villain. Did you love her? Yes. Do you still? No. Why didn't you go? Because by then the workshop was not an excuse. It was a life I had chosen. And me? I spent years believing I would have followed you if you had asked properly. Would you? I don't know. That is the answer I hated most. Claire leaned back. Maybe we both needed certainty from someone who didn't have it. The building pipes creaked. She glanced toward the door. Do you think Richard will come back? Possibly. Do you want security notified for the night? Yes. I called the front desk and provided his description. When I finished, Claire said, You asked first. I am capable of improvement under observation. I noticed. Her hand rested on the cushion between us, close but not touching mine. Why did you really ask me to stay? I said. You could have called Jenna, Michael, or building security. Claire took a long breath. Because when I saw you at dinner, every part of me that had become competent and independent remained intact. But the exhausted part, the one that used to fall asleep in your truck while you drove us home, remembered what it felt like not to be responsible for every minute. That sounds like needing me. It is, but need is not the same as surrender. No. I asked you to stay for one night. I did not ask you to become responsible for me. I understand. Do you? I'm learning. Claire placed her hand over mine, then stay a little longer. I turned my palm upward, and we sat holding hands while the rain weakened outside. The following morning, Richard arrived with an attorney. Building security stopped them in the lobby, and Claire agreed to meet in the shared conference room downstairs. I joined only after she asked. Richard looked as though he had not slept. The seller wants confirmation by noon, he said. If the trust does not release funds, the building goes to another buyer. Then it goes, Claire replied. Richard stared at her. You spent 3 years building Second Step. That does not give you permission to corner Ethan into signing. I did not corner him. Your mother's trust created the requirement. You followed me to dinner and came to my apartment after I said no. Because you were avoiding the only realistic solution. Claire's attorney, a woman named Anita Brooks, placed a folder on the table. There is another realistic solution. The trust can issue a secured loan rather than purchasing the building outright, but only after independent review. Richard's attorney objected that the deadline made review impossible. Then the deadline is the problem, I said. Richard turned toward me. You know nothing about the clinic. Correct. Which is why no responsible trustee would authorize $800,000 before reviewing operations, liabilities, and governance. You are not a trustee. My approval is required. Because of an outdated romantic arrangement. Claire stiffened. I answered before she could. Then you should be especially careful about relying on it. Richard pushed a financial summary across the table. The clinic serves patients who have nowhere else to go. And the building purchase would place the trust's entire balance into property controlled by your company, Anita said. Second Step becomes a tenant. I looked at Claire. You knew that? The original draft gave the nonprofit an ownership option. This version doesn't, she said. Richard leaned forward. The seller changed terms. We can renegotiate later. Claire's face became cold. You removed the ownership option without telling me, because delays were killing the purchase. You expected Ethan to sign a document I had not fully reviewed. I expected you to prioritize patience over pride. Claire stood. Meeting over. Richard followed. If you walk away, staff will know whose decision closed the clinic. Tell them the truth. The lease is ending, funding is inadequate, and you attempted to transfer control of a nonprofit facility to your private company. You cannot prove that was my intention. The contract proves the structure. His expression hardened. You always need someone to blame when your idealism becomes expensive. Claire's face went pale, but she did not retreat. And you always call control practicality when other people pay the price. Security escorted Richard and his attorney from the building. In the elevator afterward, Claire stared at the floor. I missed the ownership clause, she said. You caught it now. Because Anita reviewed it. That is why attorneys exist. I almost signed. You didn't. 27 patients may still lose treatment. Then we find a legitimate plan. You said we. Yes. Claire looked at me. Why? Because the work matters and because I can help without signing a blank check. What does help mean? A 30-day operational review, search for alternative sites. Meet with staff and patients, build a budget independent of Richard's company. If the trust can support it responsibly, I approve. If not, I explain why. And what do you want in return? The question hurt, though I understood why she asked. Nothing personal. Not even an answer about us? Especially not that. Claire's eyes filled. That might be the kindest thing you have ever said to me. It was also financially responsible. There you are. For the next month, Claire and I worked together almost every day. Second Step occupied a converted warehouse in Denver with treatment rooms, adaptive kitchens, and a workshop where patients relearned job skills. I flew there with Claire, Anita, and an independent accountant. The clinic's finances were strained but honest. Richard's management company charged inflated administrative fees, and several contracts had been structured to give him increasing control. Claire had designed the clinical program but allowed Richard to manage money because she believed he understood business better. I repeated the same mistake, she said one evening as we reviewed files in the empty therapy gym. What a mistake. Letting someone else define practicality because I feared my vision would sound naive. You did that with me? Sometimes. You spoke confidently about mortgages, insurance, and plans. I interpreted confidence as authority. I interpreted your silence as agreement. Claire moved between parallel bars patients used for walking practice. Richard was different. He used authority intentionally. But you left him. After 2 years. Still counts. You are unusually generous about my decision-making. I am trying not to make this review into an audition for your approval. How is that going? Poorly. She smiled. We found a better solution than the rushed property purchase. A former rehabilitation hospital outside Asheville had closed one wing but retained treatment equipment. The hospital board was willing to lease the space to Second Step for 5 years at a reduced rate in exchange for community service hours. The trust could fund relocation, establish an endowment, and preserve enough capital for operations. Ownership would belong entirely to the nonprofit. Claire would serve as executive director under an independent board. I would hold no position after approving the initial use of funds. You wrote yourself out, she said when I presented the proposal. The trust should not make our personal relationship part of clinic governance. Mom wanted us to work together. We did. And after the money is released, you run the clinic. What happens to us? We stop using work to avoid that question. Claire set down the proposal. I'm afraid the answer will be different when you're no longer needed. So am I. You are needed now. Professionally. And personally. The room became quiet. I don't want gratitude mistaken for love, but I said, it isn't. You told me you didn't know. I know more now. Because I helped save the clinic. No, because you let the clinic remain mine. Claire approached me slowly. The man I left would have built himself into the center of every system to prove he was committed. The woman who left would have accepted help, then disappeared before anyone could expect something back. I don't want to disappear. Then don't. You make it sound simple. The action is simple. The reasons are not. Claire reached for my hand, then stopped. May I? Yes. Her fingers closed around mine. I love you, she said. The words came quietly, without a deadline or crisis. I never stopped completely. I stopped waiting. I stopped imagining we would reunite. But the love changed instead of ending. I looked at her hand in mine. I love you too. Claire exhaled shakily. That does not solve everything. Nothing useful ever does. Do you want to try again? Slowly. Separate homes? For now. No engagement plans hidden in spreadsheets? There were never spreadsheets. There were color-coded calendars. Completely different technology. She laughed, and I kissed her. The kiss carried memory, but it did not feel like returning. It felt like meeting at the same door from opposite sides and choosing to open it together. The clinic moved to Asheville in the spring. Claire hired most of the Denver staff who wanted to relocate and helped others find new positions. Richard resigned after the independent board demanded a full accounting of management fees. He threatened litigation, but the contract supported the nonprofit's right to terminate his company. No dramatic arrest followed, only attorneys, audits, and the slow removal of influence he had assumed would remain permanent. Claire did not make him the central story. She focused on patience, employees, and rebuilding trust. I returned to my workshop and discovered that dating Claire again required skills more difficult than financial review. She sometimes canceled plans when the clinic faced emergencies. Instead of quietly resenting her, I said, I feel unimportant tonight, even though I know the situation is urgent. Claire did not dismiss me. She explained what happened, asked what I needed, and rescheduled with specificity. I sometimes responded to her stress by offering 5 solutions before asking whether she wanted any. She would raise one finger and say, listening first. I learned to sit with discomfort without treating it as unfinished work. We had our worst argument 6 months after the clinic opened. Claire was offered a national grant that required expanding Second Step into 3 states. She began preparing the application before telling me. When I found proposal documents on her kitchen table, old fear returned. You're planning to leave again, I said. Claire's face hardened. The grant does not require me to move. You didn't tell me. I received it yesterday. You created a 40-page draft overnight? My team had prepared parts before the invitation. So other people knew. Professionally. And I didn't. Because I wanted to understand the opportunity before discussing how it affected us. That is what you said about Denver. No, with Denver, I hid the interview because I expected you to oppose it. Here, I intended to speak after one day. How am I supposed to know the difference? By asking rather than accusing. The words stopped me. I looked at the documents again. Do you want to move? No. Do you want the grant? Yes. Would it change your travel? Probably. That is what I wanted to discuss. Shame replaced anger. I'm sorry. I understand why you reacted. Understanding doesn't make it fair. No. Claire closed the proposal. But I also need to understand that waiting one day to organize my thoughts is not secrecy. Agreed. And I need to tell you when something could trigger our history, even before I have every answer. Also agreed. We sat at the table and discussed travel, staffing, and whether our relationship could support expansion. The grant application changed. Claire delegated more authority locally. I agreed to travel with her occasionally but refused to become unpaid logistics support. She laughed and called that growth. The grant was approved the following year. We maintained separate homes for 18 months. Friends found this confusing because we spent most nights together, owned duplicate coffee makers, and argued about which refrigerator contained edible food. Claire eventually asked whether I wanted to move into her apartment. Your apartment has one closet, I said. That is not an answer. My house has a workshop. So you want me to move into your? I want us to choose a place together. We bought a modest house halfway between the clinic and my workshop. Before signing, we discussed finances, private space, and what would happen if one of us needed change. Claire requested a room that belonged only to her. I requested a garage large enough to store wood without turning the dining room into a lumberyard. We wrote no emotional clauses into the contract. Your mother would approve, I said while we unpacked. Claire looked toward Margaret's letter, now framed in her office. She might complain we ignored her preferred timeline. She created a 10-year trust. Patience was clearly part of the design. 2 years later, I proposed beside the oakside table with the sticking drawer. I had repaired it secretly, then realized Claire might interpret that as erasing history, so I left the drawer unchanged. I placed the ring inside. She pulled the drawer, met resistance, and glared at me. You still haven't fixed this. Open it completely. It is fighting me. Character. When she found the ring, she sat down hard on the couch. Ethan. Before you answer, I have a question longer than the original proposal would have been. You never proposed the first time. We became engaged because my mother asked whether we planned to waste another year and you said no. That explains several things. I knelt in front of her. Claire Morgan, I once thought commitment meant removing uncertainty. When uncertainty remained, I worked harder, planned more, and listened less. You taught me that commitment is choosing to remain present while another person changes. Tears filled her eyes. That is annoyingly good. I practiced in the workshop. Continue. I do not want the woman I almost married 6 years ago. I want you now, the woman who built a clinic, made mistakes, set boundaries, came home, and asked me to stay without asking me to own the outcome. Will you marry me and continue telling me when my help stops feeling helpful? Claire laughed through tears. I have conditions. Naturally. No secret debt. Agreed. No relocation assumptions. Agreed. And when I ask you not to leave, you ask why before deciding what staying means. Agreed. She held out her hand. Then, yes. I slid the ring onto her finger. The drawer remains broken, she said. Historically significant. Fix it before the wedding. That sounds controlling. It is a direct request. Growth. We married at Second Steps Garden Courtyard the following autumn. Several former patients attended, including a man named Harold who had relearned to use his right hand after a stroke and insisted on signing our guest book without assistance. Claire cried more watching him write than during our vows. The trust money was never mentioned in the ceremony, neither was Richard. Our story did not need a villain to explain why we once failed. Fear, exhaustion, pride, and unspoken expectations had been enough. During my vows, I promised to ask what Claire wanted before constructing a solution. She promised to speak before leaving became the only choice she could see. We both promised that love would not become permission to control, disappear, or assume. Years later, the clinic expanded into 2 additional states through partnerships rather than ownership. Claire traveled often, but the plans belonged to both of us because the consequences did. My furniture company created adaptive workspaces for rehabilitation centers. We worked together selectively, protecting our marriage from becoming another organization, requiring constant management. The old side table remained in our living room. I eventually repaired the drawer, but Claire made me leave a small mark inside where the wood had once caught. Proof it was difficult, she said. No one will see it. We will know. On the 6th anniversary of the night I drove her home, rain fell over Asheville. Claire and I attended another dinner with Michael and Jenna, who now claimed full responsibility for our marriage. Afterward, I drove Claire home, our home. In the driveway, she remained seated when I turned off the engine. What? I asked. Stay here a minute. We live inside. I know. Is something wrong? No, I was remembering the first ride. Rain moved across the windshield in silver lines. Claire reached for my hand. I asked you not to leave because I was afraid of Richard, the contract, and being alone with decisions I had delayed too long. But that was not the whole reason. What was the whole reason? I saw you at dinner and realized I had spent 6 years becoming someone capable of asking directly for what she wanted. I didn't know whether I wanted a relationship yet. I only knew I wanted one more hour where you were still close enough to choose. And now? Now I want another 50 years, though I reserve the right to renegotiate based on your snoring. You snore. Deflection. I kissed her hand. I used to believe helping Claire get home was a simple act of decency, but people can arrive at an address without feeling safe enough to stay there. That night, I drove my ex-girlfriend home, carried her bag upstairs, and prepared to leave before either of us could complicate the past. She kept me there not by locking the door or offering a perfect apology, but by doing the one thing we had both failed to do years earlier. She asked clearly. I stayed, but not as a rescuer, a trustee, or the owner of her choices. I stayed long enough to listen. Everything that came afterward was built from that difference. If this story reminded you that second chances begin with honest requests rather than silent expectations, subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes love does not return when someone promises never to leave. Sometimes it returns when one person finally says, please stay, and the other asks what staying should truly mean. And the other